Hi, this is Jamie and welcome to another Now Productivity Big Idea. Today we're kind of looking at perfectionism. Are you always seeking perfection in the work that you're doing, never quite satisfied, working away at something and it never gets done? You always feel there's something extra that you need to do. Well, maybe we could take a lesson from this guy, Prince. Certainly in the 80s with his Purple Rain album, he was certainly reigning the charts with hits such as Let's Go Crazy, When Doves Cry was a classic one there, and of course Purple Rain and the film Purple Rain as well. Now Prince tragically died nearly 4 years ago, but they're starting to discover his vault of tracks and songs that he'd written and recorded and left at his Paisley Park mansion for us to discover, and we're starting to see that now in a recent box set. They have these vault of kind of 2 albums worth of tracks, and they reckon that he's got about a century's worth of albums that could come out. So I'm guessing they're talking about if there was an album coming out every year of 10 tracks, they've got say 100 years, so 1,000 songs that he's got ready to go. And so they're starting to drip feed those through, and I thought, wow, that was a really productive guy. And a lot of this was during his real key time of during the 80s. How did he manage to make all those songs in such a short space of time? There was an interview with one of his engineers from that time in the 80s, and what it seems that he was doing was writing and recording a song every day. Now, it looks like it wasn't sort of a general 9 to 5 thing. You might start at say midday and finish at maybe 7 o'clock the following morning. But he'd get it written, recorded, done and dusted there and then. And of course, he was a perfectionist. He knew what things wanted to be like, or he wasn't quite sure, and he kept playing with his ideas. But it was kind of the finishing point was the end of the day, probably before he then hit the sack and went to bed, that was it. It was done and dusted. And if we think about that these days with say software development or building products, it's agile ways of working that we have now, iterative ways of developing things. We'll kind of, if we're developing a product or something, that we would give it kind of, like a 2-week sprint, and by the end of those 2 weeks, we'd have like a working prototype of something to show someone. If we're building an app, there's something we could maybe show a potential customer that this is roughly what it's going to look like, and then we can get some feedback from the customer saying, actually, could we have it in blue instead of red? Could we get it to do this and rather than that? And then we can go out and we can iterate again. So could we do that with our own personal things that we get involved in day to day? Could we have a little sprint during the day to say, right, we're going to have something completed, or at least maybe a prototype or a first draft of something by the end of the day? We might be creating a presentation, designing a workshop, designing a report, preparing an event, whatever it is that we're working on. That could we say, right, there's, by a particular time, we're going to have something that's there, but at that point it's over. Say by 5 o'clock I'm done and dusted. That is what is going out. That's what I am going to deliver. Could you find something that you're working on that you could get to that point? Something maybe that's hanging around on your to-do list, or you think it's got a bit of a big animal that could take a long time. Could we just say, right, by the end of the day or the end of a couple of days, that then it's done and dusted by that time? Because if we go back to music and musicians, we hear the stories about bands who, just writing and recording a song, it would take days, weeks, months, years, and they're perfecting little bits, like just getting the hi-hat just right, or adding or taking out tiny bits. But do we just want to be, a bit like the Beatles were? They were just rolling up, rocking out tunes, day after day. They were writing and recording very, very quickly. And of course, we always hear about the best songs, appeared, in written and created in about 15 minutes. So could we do that with the work that we do ourselves? That we, instead of being a perfectionist over things, could we actually get at least something out there and something delivered? That's it could be 90% of where you want it to be, but at least it's out. and delivered, and we can move on to the next thing. So there's today's big idea about perfectionism. Can we stop it by maybe putting some time limits of when we're going to say, right, it's ready to go. So have a play with that. Let me know if there's anything that you've experimented with that works for. Let me know in the comments, and I look forward to seeing you next time for the next big idea. Cheers.